We are glad to hear that both sides appear to have quickly disengaged from the clashes. We're closely monitoring the situation. We encourage India and China to utilize existing bilateral channels to discuss disputed boundaries.
I can tell you that DoD continues to closely watch developments along the line of actual control at the India-China border. We have seen the PRC continue to amass forces and build military infrastructure along the so-called LAC.
We've seen these reports. We call for de-escalation and to ensure that the tensions along in that area do not grow.
Good evening, hello and welcome. You're watching The Right Stand here on CNN News 18 with me, Poonam Burde. A little over 48 hours ago, India learnt about China doing what it does best: needless provocation and furthering its expansionist agenda. Now, over the last 2 days, you've all heard about what transpired in Tawang in Arunachal, how our brave forces looked the enemy in the eye and sent them groveling back. A warning was then duly sent that the Chinese troops need to stay on their side of the border and try no misadventure whatsoever. You've also heard the political noise around the issue. And I say noise because that's how it played out in both houses of parliament, both yesterday and today. There was ruckus and complete chaos. We want a discussion. We want answers from the government, claimed the opposition, while casting doubts on India's political leadership. And when they didn't get their way, they promptly walked out of the house. Some would say that's holding the parliament and in a way the country hostage. But not once did any of them call out the aggressor, the real villain in this case, China. We wonder why. Now, China, true to its character, tried to twist the entire narrative and pin the blame on India. Well, Beijing should have learned from its past mistakes and not resorted to fakery, because every single time they're caught out, and this instance is no different. Here's how Beijing has egg on its face all over again. There are certain claims that China made yesterday, and here's what really happened. So China claimed that Indian troops illegally crossed the border and provoked. The reality, as the defense minister briefed the parliament yesterday, is that it was the PLA troops who unilaterally tried to alter status quo. China yesterday, through its mouthpiece and through its ministry, came out and claimed that the border situation is stable overall. But that's far from reality, because China has been provoking time and again. The reality is that India has now warned Chinese commanders at a flag meeting that was held right after this skirmish in Tawang. China has also been claiming that it was the Indian troops that actually obstructed Chinese PLA's routine patrol, and that is why the clash erupted. That's far from reality, because India has gone on to say that India prevented transgression and ensured that all of those PLA troops who provoked us needlessly were sent back to their commander positions. So China is left completely embarrassed as the world watches on. There are several claims that it has made in the last 24 hours, all of which have been busted. Now, while the opposition here in India questions how the central government has failed in countering Beijing, today we had the United States back us, asserting that it was a growing trend by China to assert itself in places it shouldn't. The US also keeping a close watch as to what is transpiring and how China is needling India as far as the LAC situation is concerned. Now, make no mistake, the opposition in this country is well within its right to question the government. That's how a healthy democracy works. But they should also bear in mind that diplomacy is a slow and steady process. It's not a magic wand. So a quick reminder to the opposition and to all those who are watching this show tonight. Here's how India has been tightening the screws on Beijing economically. In May 2021, India excluded Huawei and ZTE from 5G trials. That was one of the ways how we were choking China financially. In 2020 of June, banned multiple Chinese apps including TikTok and PUBG. This was in the aftermath of the Galwan clash. In April 2020, we curbed Chinese investments, mandating government clearances clamp down on indirect investments from China's neighbors. So the clampdown has been going on from even before Galwan actually happened. So that is how India has been tightening the screws financially, economically, diplomatically, and of course militarily. Our forces have stood ground. So the one question that remains to be asked here on The Right Stand is that, has Indian diplomacy completely cornered the dragon? That's the question we'll find answers to over the next half an hour on the show. India-China clash is the hashtag you can use and engage with us on social media as well. Joining me on this debate, national spokesperson of the BJP, Sanju Verma, spokesperson of the Congress, Meeta Chakrabarti, also with us, professor in Chinese studies at the JNU and an expert, Dr. Shrikant Kondapalli also joins us, and an international and independent China strategist. Andrew K.P. Leong also joins us on this broadcast. And Mr. Leong, I'd like to begin with you before we get into the politics here back home. As far as the global narrative is concerned, it doesn't look like China has many takers. China has been trying to play the victim card. China has been trying to pin the blame on India, much like they did in Galwan as well. They tried to downplay the number of casualties back in Galwan. That was also, the truth was also out sooner than later. And now yet again, we have China trying to push a narrative, push a propaganda that nobody's falling for.
Well, I think that there is a global kind of xenophobia going on here. You've got to ask yourselves why China is doing this as claim. This is a bit of a nonsense, because China has got so many problems domestically, internationally, and why China should lash out all over the world. I mean, this is really ridiculous. Now, as far as the border clashes are concerned, obviously this has been going on for decades. I think that both leaders recently ordered their military to scale down the confrontation and or to scale back any kind of clashes, because both countries are nuclear powered. Both are large countries. So there's no point in provoking each other. But there is no doubt that there are a great deal of misunderstanding, a great deal of lack of clarity. For example, the line of actual control is never been clear. So I think both sides should sit down and also carry on talking and instill some sort of a mechanism to prevent any kind of incidents from snowballing into major conflicts. Now, as far as accusations of cyber attack or things like that, well, obviously, these things need to be investigated by both sides, preferably. So it's no point in just finger pointing, theft, chest thumping, and also scoring brownie points.
But isn't that exactly what China is trying to do, sir? Because like you said, China is facing extremely precarious situation back home. It's most vocal protest that we've ever seen in the recent past, something that nobody would have imagined can actually happen in a country like China. And yet we have people naming Xi Jinping and calling for the downfall of the Communist Party. So perhaps this is just a narrative that China is trying to build by trying to flex muscle on the border, trying to quell the kind of issues they face back home.
Well, this is again ridiculous, because if you look at independent studies, the one conducted by Harvard Kennedy School last year, and also this beginning of this year by the New York-based Edelman Trust, EDELMAN Edelman Trust Barometer, based in New York, both organizations found that the Chinese Communist Party is the party best supported by its people, compared with almost all countries around the world, including the United States, multiple ranks below China, because under tutelage of the Chinese Communist Party, the lives of billions of Chinese people have been totally transformed across the board. Whereas in an adversarial democracy like the United States, the government of the day tends to tilt towards the vested interests and also constituents of the winning party only. So there is no question that the Chinese Communist Party has established its legitimacy in the eyes of the people and in the eyes of independent research institutions. Obviously, with 1.4 billion people, a fifth of mankind, obviously there are areas of dissatisfaction. There are people who are not happy, and especially with the pandemic management. After 3 years, some people are getting impatient. So that's understandable. But now, China is now winding down the rather successful policy, because if you look at the number of deaths under China's pandemic management, is again way ahead of other people. I mean, for example, in the United States, over 1 million people have died, and the United States has got only 1/4 of China's population with a healthcare system much more
but many in your country
China.
also don't think China's handling of COVID-19 has been any effective 3 years later. And that is exactly why we're seeing the kind of protests that we are seeing in a country like China, like I mentioned. Do stay on with me because I want to get in Dr. Kondapalli as well on this. And do you agree, sir, the kind of comments that are coming to the fore? China is not worried, it seems. But it definitely would look like it is, not just as far as the LAC is concerned, because India is fortifying the area around the LAC, the kind of construction that we're building, the kind of roads and connectivity that India is looking at. It is something that was never looked at in the past. And that is something that cannot be denied.
Thank you, Poonam, for having me in the show. I'm not sure what we are discussing so far. There is a lot of propaganda on China's good intentions, peaceful love for the neighbors, and so on. On the other hand, we see the December 9th incident and June 15, 2020 incident. 20 Indian soldiers were killed in that incident. China took 8 months to decide how many of them were killed, and they came with a figure of 4, while the TASS news agency of Russia, which used to be part of the Communist Party in Soviet Union, they mentioned 45 casualties. And Western sources indicated 120 casualties on the part of China. So I do not know what we are discussing. There was a mention about we should talk to each other and we should express love to each other and so on. For the past 36 years, we have been discussing the territorial dispute. In 1960, 3 times we discussed. And from 1981, regularly, except during 1998 nuclear tests, there was no discussion that year. But till 2018, every year there was a discussion on the territorial dispute. And the outcome was that 1993 agreement, 1996 agreement, 2005, 2013 agreements on CBMs, confidence building measures. But China simply throws out all these confidence building agreements and suddenly mobilizes 2 brigades and kills 20 Indian soldiers. So now if we are going to talk again and sign an agreement with China, there is no guarantee that that would be respected. And so I do not know what we are talking about, that we should have another agreement so that China can violate that agreement again. Dr. Jaishankar's position was that unless until peace and tranquility prevails on the border, there cannot be any bilateral relations, period. And so we have not had for the past 2.5 years any discussion related to the diplomatic or strategic dialogue or host of other bilateral discussions. So the crux of the matter is, while China wants to decouple from the border, we are seeing such incidents periodically, and it is very likely to happen once again in the border areas, because China mobilized 70,000 troops in the western sector. It has 220,000 troops in the Western Theater Command, as against 120,000 troops in organized by India. All of them are eyeball to eyeball across the 3,488 kilometer long line of actual control. As we are speaking, they are highly mobilized, both sides. And this is not the time for, again, going back to an agreement, or we need to
also, what's the point of having an agreement when the other side is not going to adhere to it? Because yes, many would say this is a perceived line of actual control. There is no clear demarcation, but there are still standard rules and protocols that are in place. There are demarcations that have been made, and yet we have China crossing over every now and then. Those transgressions keep happening, those provocations keep happening, and India has been standing steadfastly both leadership-wise, politically, and of course with boots on ground. And Meeta Chakrabarti, we've heard the kind of conversation that has happened in Parliament, outside Parliament, the kind of questions that the opposition has raised about how this is a weak leadership at the centre, and which is why we're seeing these kind of transgressions happen all the time. But can you deny that in the last 5 to 7 years, there's a lot that has happened in terms of progress, in terms of development as far as the line of actual control is concerned? Can you deny that 32 roads along the LAC have been sanctioned? Over 2,000-kilometer long roads have been constructed along the LOC. That's all happened in the last 5 years. The LAC has been fortified. Can you deny that?
Good evening to all your viewers, and if you can give me some uninterrupted time to make a few very quick points.
Sure, go ahead.
Firstly, we, the Indian National Congress Party, and I think the same can be said about all main political parties across India, we stand united with the nation, with our armed forces, with the government of the day, as far as our national security and territorial integrity is concerned. So we don't think that this is an opportune moment for politicking, number one. Number two, is it a fact that we are seeing an increased level of Chinese transgression and Chinese aggression over the past few years? If you look at the data in June 2020, we lost 20 soldiers in the Galwan region. We saw repeated efforts made by the Chinese troop to destabilize the status quo in January 2021, in September and October 2021, and finally we saw this incident on 9th of December 2022, which got reported 3 days later. There was a delay of 3 days in reporting it. It got reported on the 12th of December 2022. So we are seeing an increased level of Chinese aggression along the line of actual control. Even that cannot be denied. Now, in these circumstances, all we are doing is asking the government of the day, the Modi government, to come, to be honest, to be transparent, and tell us as whether there had been permanent structures built by the Chinese troops in disputed areas along the line of actual control, number one, to tell us about the number of incidents of the Chinese transgression that has happened, and to have an informed debate and discussion, a constructive discussion in the parliament with the political opposition parties. All we are seeking is that the government of the day should take the nation into confidence and the opposition parties, the elected representatives of the principal opposition parties into confidence in a time when obviously there is something happening on our Indo-China border, and when we are seeing repeated incidents of transgression by the Chinese troops. We stand united with the Indian government. We stand united with our Indian armed forces. We are very, very proud, and we are absolutely indebted to our soldiers for their sacrifice and for their valor. But all we are saying is that this is not the time for politicking. Take us into confidence, take the political class into confidence, and let us work towards a strategy as whether we do understand that we both are established nuclear players. We do understand that there is a huge economic implication in our relationship. We were talking about banning. If I can give you the right data from 2021 and 2022, the Indo-China trade, it stands, I think, around $95 billion US, with $73 billion being in Chinese favor. It's at a record high. So banning a few Chinese apps will not help the equation. So all we are saying is, let us have a discussion, a constructive discussion in the parliament. Take the opposition parties in confidence. Let us have closed-door meetings. Let us come up with a strategy. Obviously, diplomatic talks will not work in the short term. Could be the long-term strategy.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we've been talking about, that diplomacy is a slow and steady process. It is taking time. Yes, you've raised some pertinent questions, and as the opposition of this country, you are all within your rights to do so. But before I get in Sanju Verma to respond, I just want to ask you one question, Meeta Chakrabarti. In this entire matter, and like you said, Chinese transgressions, incursions, provocations along the line of actual control have taken place several times in the last couple of years. Who then do you hold responsible Is it not China? Is it not the aggressor?
Of course, China and our.
So then why not say that in unequivocal terms, even when the United States has come out and backed India's stand to say that China has a growing trend of being in places that they shouldn't be in?
I'm glad that the United States has taken a stand and has made this and has taken a stand in public domain. But I think as a principal opposition party, we are well within our rights to ask that are there permanent structures being built in Dimsang and Dimchak area? Are there permanent homes being made for winter occupation by the Chinese troops in the disputed areas? What are we doing about it?
Sure, and I'll have
Can
Sanju
we
Verma
have
respond to you over that. We are in a democracy, Sanju Verma, says the opposition. We can ask questions. We can demand answers. Why shouldn't the government give us?
Not only demanding answers.
Thank you, Poonam.
Yes, Meera Chakrabarti, you made your point. Let Sanju Verma respond. I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Sanju Verma.
The Congress panelists got about 6 to 7 minutes to make a point. I don't need that long. In half the time, I'll tell you what our strategy is. Point number one, for everybody who says that there has been no official communication from the Modi government on the status of the Chinese, attempt at transgressing into the Tawang sector, I will just read out for the benefit of your audience, without adding or deleting anything. Yesterday, Rajnath Singh tweeted, on 9th December 2022, PLA troops tried to transgress the LSE in Yangtze area of Tawang sector and unilaterally change the status quo. The Chinese attempt was contested by our troops in a firm and resolute manner. I would like to stress upon the two words firm and resolute, which the opposition obviously has failed to take cognizance of for their own political convenience and expediency. Point number two, it is not just about the official communication with respect to what happened on the 9th of December. You look at the history of the Modi government, be it the Raksha Mantri, be it Mr. S. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, or even for that matter, the Home Minister, Amit Shah. Yesterday, while addressing the press, he categorically said when questioned, ना एक इंच हमने किसी भी विदेशी ताकत को दिया है और ना भारत का एक इंच हम कभी किसी विदेशी ताकत को देंगे, हमारा एक इंच भी कब्जा नहीं हुआ है. The problem with the opposition is they are so driven by their visceral hatred for Narendra Modi and what he stands for that they refuse to take cognizance of what the government says even on important matters of national security. And you asked a very relevant point. Poonam, why is it that these transgressions are happening so frequently? And this is what I want to highlight. When the UPA government signed, various confidence building measures, we had CBMs that were signed in 1993, in 1996, in 2005, and even in 2013. When we signed the confidence building measure in 2005, which was done by the Manmohan Singh-led Congress government, the Chinese side did not want us to add the word existing. We said that both sides will respect the line of actual control. We will ensure that there is restraint, point number one. We will ensure that there is peace, point number two. And we will not use firearms, point number three. These 3 points were made in the CBM signed in 2005, wide Article 5, 6, 8 and 10 of the respective CBM. Now the Chinese side did not want India to add the word existing. And I have seen military experts on your show and elsewhere who say that had we added the word existing line of actual control, then these transgressions could have been minimized, if not eradicated altogether. And I also want to say one more thing. The opposition asks for a discussion. Well and good, it is their democratic and constitutional right. Equally, it is also the democratic and constitutional prerogative of the government of the day to decide in matters of national security what to divulge, what to reveal, what not to reveal, when to divulge and how much to divulge. Let this be very clear to the Congress party, and as you rightly said, Poonam, it is very fine to sit here on television debates and wax eloquent about the valor of the Indian Army. But when you consistently refuse to acknowledge that the Chinese were outflanked, when you refuse to acknowledge that the Chinese were given a befitting reply, when you refuse to acknowledge that the Chinese were thrashed when they tried to transgress, are you not undermining the credibility? Are you not undermining the valor? Are you not undermining the bona fides of the very Indian army that you actually use for your political expediency?
And at the very least, Meeta Chakrabarti, at the very least, the kind of comments that come to the fore show a divided house, and that perhaps gives the strength to China or emboldens China to actually go ahead and say it was India who's to blame. We didn't do anything. They illegally crossed into our territory. But I want to ask you,
Can you give me 30 seconds?
Yes, I will give you more time than that. But I also want to ask you one question. You asked about discussion in the parliament.
Yes.
Today, we had 17 opposition parties walk out of both houses of parliament because they said we want a discussion. Okay, you're not giving it to us, so we're going to pack up our bags and leave. Aren't you holding the parliament and in turn the country hostage? The government is the government is saying we'll have a discussion. We just can't do it the minute you ask us for it.
So fine, they can tell us when they are going to plan to have this discussion. Yes, we are all aware of what Rajnath Singh ji stated or tweeted out in public domain. We are all aware of it, and we do stand with our Indian armed forces. We are very, very proud of the sacrifices that the Indian armed forces make to keep our territorial integrity intact. The problem with the ruling dispensation, and again, I'm trying very hard to not make this a political issue in this hour of crisis, is that every single time that we ask for some data or for some information or for some discussion, it becomes an issue of media and image management. The image management of the Prime Minister Modi or the image management of the Modi government. So that is the problem. We are discussing issues of national importance. We are discussing
30 seconds, Sanju Verma. Let her finish. I'll come to you.
Territorial security, and even then it becomes an issue of image management. All we are asking is just share simple data. Share. Can you please not interrupt while I'm speaking?
No, you've spoken enough.
So all we are asking is, and they can discuss and they can tell us whether there can be a discussion in the parliament.
You keep going to the Congress and she keeps repeating reckless allegations. I need my time to rebut.
Sanju Verma, you had your time. I asked her a question. She is making her point. I'll come back to you. 30 seconds. Meeta Chakrabarti, 30 seconds. Finish your point. Sanju Verma, come to you.
It is a fact that after what happened in Galwan region in June 2020, we had conflicting reports coming from different ministries within the government of India. It is a recorded fact. It is a fact that there are reports of permanent structures being built in disputed areas along the line of actual control. And I think as a principal opposition party, we are well within our rights to ask discussion and ask for a discussion. We are not being given a free run. Ms. Verma thinks that I have been given a free run. That is not the case.
I asked her a question for her to answer, Sanju Verma. I'll give you your time as well. Let's not make this personal. If you get your space, show us
facts and an opportunity to have a constructive discussion. And as Ms. Verma very clearly stated,
and that's perhaps the point the opposition is trying to make, Sanju Verma, that we want a discussion, but clearly no one is hearing us.
Okay, now can I?
Go ahead.
I've been listening.
Sanju Verma, go ahead. Meeta Chakrabarti, you made your point. Let Sanju Verma respond, please.
Okay. Thank you, Poonam. I heard the Congress out very patiently. Let me be very clear. And I say this with absolute confidence and responsibility. The Congress today does not stand in solidarity with the government of the day on matters of national security.
I take strong
exception
to that statement.
Meeta Chakrabarti, I gave you your uninterrupted time. Let Sanju Verma finish.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Now let me educate this uneducated,
let's not make this personal, Sanju Verma. Let's just make our point. Let's just stick to it.
Let me finish. I'm not making a personal comment. I'm stating facts. Tell me one thing. The opposition yesterday was informed by the Parliamentary Affairs Minister, Mr. Prahlad Joshi, that 12 noon is the time when Rajnath Singh, the Defence Minister, after his initial commentary, will take questions during question hour. Rajnath Singh had barely even finished speaking, and the opposition created a ruckus. The House was adjourned. It was a repeat. The same sequence of events happened today. So you know, Poonam, what is happening? On the one hand, the opposition says we want questions to be answered. We want a discussion on the floor of the parliament. We want accountability from the Modi government. Modi government to China se dar gayi hai. But when we want to, on the floor of the House, answer the questions raised by the opposition, they stage a walkout. And what is this called? This is called shoot and scoot politics. What is this called? This is called suffering from a Stockholm syndrome, where you love to play victim card. That is why you do not want to engage in a constructive discussion, because you know your bluff will be called out. And Poonam, I will take another 30 seconds to tell you one more thing. This whole narrative that, permanent villages have been constructed. The Defense Minister, the External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, has repeatedly said that when we decided to disengage in February 2021 post-Galwan, it was amply evident that there were no permanent structures that were built. China was forced to disengage to Finger 8 at Pangong So. India was forced to disengage to its earlier position at Finger 3 at Pangong So. And for the first time in the history of China, they were actually forced to voluntarily disengage. Remember, Poonam, China today has a border dispute with more than 18 countries in the globe, shares a border with more than 24 countries. China has never voluntarily disengaged. So those who sit here and give a bhashan to the Modi government, I will say, forget about your Nehru giving 38,000 square kilometers of Aksai Chin to the Chinese on a golden platter. What about the 600 transgressions in the last 2 years alone of UPA 2? Have you ever come clean on that? We lost large chunks of Chabji Valley. We lost large chunks of Chumur. We lost large chunks of Tia Pangmat. We lost large chunks of Dumchere. When an incompetent Congress led by an incompetent Manmohan Singh were at the helm of affairs. So stop lecturing us on national security, because your track record does not inspire, whereas ours does, because we walk the talk.
Sure. Meeta Chakrabarti, 30 seconds to you, because I want to close this debate. I'm running short of time, but 30 seconds. You want the discussions from the government, but there are certain questions that have been asked of the Congress during UPA rule as well. Would you come clean on those as well? Can that can that discussion be a two-way street?
I absolutely, and I refuse to go down to the level of personal attacks and personal slander as the panelists from the BJP often does, because that's not my level, and that's not my level. I did not interrupt.
Sanju Verma, you got your uninterrupted time. I have just 30 seconds before I close this debate. Meeta Chakrabarti, please make your point quickly. Let's not make this personal, please.
With this lady on the panel, it's extremely difficult to have any meaningful discussion with this lady on the panel.
Your leaders speak rubbish against
Well, I will request the anchor to ask her to keep quiet.
Unfortunately, I'm running completely out of time as far as this debate is concerned. Politics seems to have taken precedence yet again, and we're seeing the kind of war of words that has erupted on this debate as well. But I'd like to thank all my panelists for joining us here on this broadcast with their perspective. We're shifting focus now to some more news coming in, and that is over another important border tussle within India. It is between the two states of Maharashtra and Karnataka. The two states have been at loggerheads over redrawing boundaries, and chief ministers of both those states met with Union Home Minister Amit Shah, who has now come out and said that no side will stake claim as the matter is sub judice in court. Amit Shah also added that a neutral panel of 3 ministers from each state, as well as a panel headed by a senior IPS officer, will ensure that peace prevails on ground.
दोनों राज्यों के मिलाकर दोनों ओर से 6 मंत्री बैठेंगे और इस पर डिटेल नीचे तक परकोलेशन किस प्रकार से हो, इसकी चिंता और चर्चा करेंगे। एक सीनियर आईपीएस अफसर की अध्यक्षता में दोनों राज्य कमेटी बनाने के लिए सहमत हुए हैं, जो कानून और व्यवस्था को संविधान के हिसाब से ठीक रखने में प्रयास करेंगे। तो तय हुआ है कि जहां जहां भी इस प्रकार के फेक ट्विटर के मामले सामने आए हैं, वहां पर एफआईआर रजिस्टर की जाएगी और जिन्होंने किया है उसको भी जनता के सामने एक्सपोज किया जाएगा। इसके बाद मैं दोनों राज्यों के विपक्षी पार्टियों के मित्रों को भी इस देश के गृह मंत्री नाते अपील करना चाहता हूं, दोनों राज्यों की जनता के हित में और दोनों राज्यों की बॉर्डर पर अन्य भाषा भाषी जो लोग बस रहे हैं इनके हित में अब इसको कम से कम राजनीतिक मुद्दा न बनाया जाए। एक कमेटी जो बनी है वो कमेटी की चर्चा का आउटकम और सुप्रीम कोर्ट के फैसले का इंतजार किया जाए।
My colleague Arun Dhanta now joins me for more on this. Arun, a peace-building measure by Union Home Minister Amit Shah. There a clear message being sent out to all the politicians of both the states as well. But is that enough to quell tempers on ground? That is something only time will tell.
Well, that's right. In today's meeting, because the situation was escalating between both the states in Maharashtra and Karnataka, we had seen the disturbance being faced by people in the boundary of both the states, and therefore the meeting was called by Union Home Minister Amit Shah, and both the chief ministers were present. And they have formed a panel of 3 ministers each from both the states, which will look into the details, and they will chalk out the plan and strategy how to move forward. And the second committee of the IAS officers of both the states, because they will maintain the law and order in that area, because that has been biggest issue in last couple of months in those areas, because the violence is taking place, vehicles are being defaced, and various other things are happening, which is disturbing the peace there on the ground. And now when you have elections very much around the corner in Karnataka, this issue is also picking up. And in fact, the assembly session, which will commence on 19th of this month in Karnataka, that is also going to take place in Belagavi, which is the epicenter for both the states. So it is going to be very, very interesting. Now, our Indian Home Minister Amit Shah clearly saying that they will take all the measures to actually complete the process and to iron out the confusion between both the states, and also the use of social media where the disturbance is taking place. There are various fake accounts on the names of ministers and others who are in fact coming to the fore, and the disturbance is being created through that as well. So that will also be monitored, and FIRs will be registered in those cases as well. So we'll have to see as to what comes out through this panel of 3 ministers each, since the matter is also in the court as well. So court will also look into that matter, whether the plea of the Maharashtra government is maintainable or not.
Absolutely. Do keep a track of the fallout that happens right after this meeting that has just concluded. But for the moment, thank you so much for getting us the latest. With that, we're slipping into a quick break here on this edition, but lots lined up for you on the other side. Don't go anywhere.